is to make Edwards intelligible to widely diverse audiences by first attempting to depict him in his own time and in his own terms. Readers might also begin by thinking about Edwards as an 18th century figure and about how that context should shape their understanding of him. The most fascinating question that framed this book is, what was it like to live in Western New England in the first half of the 18th century? Or, how was that time different from our own? This second version of the question suggests, of course, a 21st century viewpoint. My task as a historian is to make intelligible the outlook of another time, which demands taking into account the various perspectives of readers and also what has transpired since the 18th century. Yet it would be a failure of imagination if we were to start out, as today's histories sometimes do, by simply judging people of the past for having outlooks that are not like our own. Rather, we must first try to enter sympathetically into an earlier world and to understand its people. Once we do that, we'll be in a far better position both to learn from them and to evaluate their outlooks critically. A number of things will be particularly striking to 21st century readers about early 18th century New England. First, the world into which Edwards was born will make a lot more sense if we think of it as British rather than American. It was, of course, significantly American, yet by the time of Edwards' death in 1758, it had not yet manifested most of the traits that were soon to be associated with America. The American Revolution was not yet on anyone's horizon, even if with hindsight we can see that many of the potentialities were there. Edwards lived in a thoroughly pre-revolutionary British province. Its British or Old World character was most conspicuously evident in its rigid hierarchical structures. We might think of 18th century or early 19th century English novels to get some sense of the social hierarchy taken for granted in 18th century British America. New England, having been shaped by 17th century Puritanism, had its own version of such hierarchism. Edwards was an aristocrat by New England standards. Clergymen in New England wielded more authority and could expect more deference to their opinions than in most other parts of the British world. Further, Edwards belonged to an elite extended family that was part of the ruling class of clergy, magistrates, judges, military leaders, village squires, and merchants. The Stoddards and Williamses, along with a few other families with whom they intermarried, ruled the Connecticut River Valley or western Massachusetts, Hampshire County, and parts of Connecticut. 18th century Britons viewed their world as monarchical and controlled by hierarchies of personal relationships. On both these counts, their assumptions were almost opposite of those of most Westerners today, who tend to think of society as, in principle, egalitarian, and in fact, controlled by impersonal forces. 18th century British American society depended on patriarchy. One's most significant relationships were likely to be vertical rather than horizontal. Fathers had authority over families and households, the cornerstones of good order. Women, children, hired servants, indentures, and African slaves were all dependent on persons directly above them. Society was conceived of as an extended household. In this arrangement, paternalism was a virtue, not a term of opprobrium. Although British people spoke much of liberty, few had personal freedom in a modern sense. Gentlemen ruled largely through a hierarchical system of patronage extending from the king down. Good order, especially for the lower ranks of society, was enforced by strict surveillance and stern punishments. Ordinary life under any circumstances was often cruel, plagued by epidemics, unrelieved pain, and constant uncertainties about life itself. Many essential tasks were painfully difficult and time-consuming. Personal dependency was one way of dealing with a harsh and insecure world and was often taken as a matter of course. Adding to the distress